Okay, so representing SDG 7, we have Youba Sokona, who's the Special Advisor on Sustainable Development at the South Centre in Switzerland. Jens Dyring Christensen, the Senior Specialist at the ILO in Pretoria. Fernando Balderrama, the Senior Investment Officer at the ADB. Odusola, Chief of Strategy and Analysis Team at the Regional Bureau for Africa at UNDP, but based in New York. And last but not least, Liz Agbor-Tabi, the Associate Director of the City and Practice Management for Africa of 100 Resilient Cities. So, the same rules again, 5 minutes each, they're on the clock. Oh, no, you've got 5. 5 minutes each. I will be brutal, but if you could just be as succinct as you can, key takeaways from each of your sessions. And Youba, if I could start with you, please, on SDG 7.
Okay, thank you. I will keep in 5 minutes. We had 3 perspectives and try to focus on what has been achieved so far on the implementation of SDG 7. Not what needs to be done, but what has been done. The perspective of the policy that has been addressed by Morocco, the perspective of the energy sector that has been addressed by South Africa, ESCOM, and then the perspective of financial institutions. Unfortunately, we did not get the private sector that did not participate to the event. And globally, the conclusion that we are on track, but countries are moving with different speed and pace. And SDG 7 is a crucial development priority. Indeed, modern energy is fundamental to human development. Achieving the target of SDG 7 will impact and be impacted by progress along the many other SDGs dimensions, and in particular, SDG 13, the climate. As renewable energy is becoming cost competitive with conventional energy and has significant potential for further cost reduction. They offer a way to reduce the net carbon intensity of the energy sector, improve the energy security, provide energy access economically in remote areas, and encourage economic development. And different cases and from Morocco, from South Africa, and Southern Africa has been illustrating the discussions. Universal access to modern energy services require transformation of the energy sector. That is important. And this transformation requires mobilizing adequate resources, ensuring physical and economic access to quality and sufficient energy services require investment. And that investment requires that government has a clear long-term vision for providing sustainable energy services and that they promulgate policies and regulation. Unless there is a long-term clear vision that is clear, it's very difficult and then to take the challenge. And dedicated national policies and targets will be needed to ensure efficient public-private partnership to facilitate energy access for the majority. And public financing to make energy affordable and policy framework that incentivize private sector investment is important. And one important critical aspect emerged that the major capacity building at various levels is needed. And then particularly to formulate projects in many African countries. And that's one of the biggest problems and issue. Regional coordination, regional cooperation is crucial. From the sub-regional to the regional level, cooperation is fundamental, is crucial. Just to sum up, policy is crucial, fundamental, with clear vision. Second, capacity development is important. And then third element, regional cooperation is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very nice and quick. Can I ask you one quick question? You talked at the beginning about, you acknowledged that different countries were going at different rates, and you then acknowledged that long-term vision from government was needed.
Yeah.
Did you find a correlation between countries that were moving fast and governments that had long-term vision?
A typical case in Morocco. because Morocco is not, they have no energy resources. They have a huge potential. And because of they have a clear policy in place, and then they have been able to attract finance. That means money is not really a problem. So if you have adequate policy, if you have a clear-term vision, and then money will flow in.
So speed is directed by the power of the long-term vision.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And thank you for being so quick. Right, now we're moving on to Jens and SDG 8.
Yes, thank you very much. So SDG 8, I'll try to be brief. 3 minutes, the clock is rolling, I see. So we had a wonderful conversation. I think we really had too short time. We had less than an hour because we started late and so on and so forth. But we had a great participation. We had the EU, we had Bart from the European Union delegation in South Africa. We had Kinua from Syngenta, a private multinational firm that are working in the agricultural sector with agricultural products and services. We had Faith from Fair Trade that are working with fair trade farmers and certifying organization. And we had Jason from IOM. So I think our conversation really centered around the perspective and the expertise of those people. Now I think goal number 8, we call it decent work economic growth, but it's actually a lot broader than economic growth and decent work. And the full title reads, promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive and decent work for all by 2030. So I think very, very ambitious, actually more ambitious than eradicating poverty, hunger, providing full healthcare coverage, at least in the ILO's opinion. And I think this is at a time where global unemployment is on the rise and we have more and more vulnerable workers across the world. The ILO put out our annual report on global employment trends this year, and we see that employment in 2017 is set to increase by 3.4 million, taking the global unemployment levels to 201 million in 2017. At the same time, 1.4 billion vulnerable workers, and these are workers that don't have decent work. So that's the challenge until 2030. Creating 200 million jobs and getting 1.4 million people out of decent work deficits. So that's the challenge, and I think that's quite steep. Then we talked about the future of farming in Africa and seeing that as a real opportunity. And farming must be seen as more than just farming. It's no longer farming with the hoe. It's actually looking at the entire value chain, looking at opportunities and value chains from the farm to the fork, and making sure that young people are more and more engaged with packages of support along value chains, access to finance, access to insurance products, and so on and so forth. Then we talked about that not all trade is fair. So we had Faith from the Fair Trade Network, and she was talking about how we as consumers actually also by our spending pattern and how we make our consumer choices can contribute to promoting decent work and inclusive growth for poor farmers and poor communities that don't have this access by paying just a slight premium on the coffee we buy, on the fair trade certified products we buy. So that's an important call to everyone to start buying fair trade products, I believe. Then we talked about labor migration, and we talked about how labor migration actually has a very big economic importance in Africa. And it's not new to Africa. Labor migration and migration has been happening for centuries. But we talked about how to make it more inclusive. So on the one hand, you have these big, bold commitments being made by the African Union, by the real economic commissions, the RECs, about free flow of labor. But then you stumble into Department of Home Affairs in South Africa. You stumble into national policies, and you have these immigration barriers. So on the one hand, you have access, free flow of goods and service and capital and products, but you don't have free flow on labor. So that's something that needs to be addressed in order to reap the benefits there of labor migration. And also the comment was made that in South Africa, at least, labor migration seems to be sort of a big issue, a big problem, a big challenge, xenophobia, hostility towards labor migrants. But in Africa, you only have 16 million of Africans live in another country than their own. And that is actually compared to 1.2 billion Africans on the continent. So it's actually a small challenge, but we need to find a way to make it more inclusive. Then we talked briefly about partnerships and how to use public funds to leverage private funds. So Bart from the European delegation talked about the new European External Investment Plan, the EIP, and how they are putting 4 billion euros into the African continent. And through that, with credit guarantee funds and other financial mechanisms, they hope to leverage another 40 billion from the private sector. And then we had a last comment about the fourth industrial revolution, and I'm looking at the person who brought that question up. And so here we are dealing with unemployment, increasing unemployment. At the same time, we are dealing with rapid technological change that are transforming entire sectors. Just a statistic from the World Economic Forum of young learners that are starting grade 1 today, when they enter the labor market, they will enter into occupations, 65% of occupations that don't yet exist. So having said that, I think the question is where the jobs are going to come from, what will they be like? One thing is for sure, we didn't have any answers, we didn't have any solutions, but the challenge is on.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. And very interesting that Minister Radebe said we had to keep, in Africa, we had to keep our eye on the fourth industrial revolution and make sure we're working towards it. But again, that recurring theme of consumer awareness, consumer education, coming back again. Fernando,
Yes.
SDG 9.
Thank
5
you.
minutes are on the clock.
SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. 5 key messages about bankability. So in Africa right now, just to talk about infrastructure, there is about a yearly need of $90 billion, and half of this is going unmet. So about $45 billion of shortage of infrastructure investments across the continent at the moment. We discussed this point, and we concluded that it's not about a lack of capital. Financiers like the African Development Bank and others are more than willing to fund bankable projects, but unfortunately the rate of development for these projects, the number of projects that are currently under development fall short of the actual demand. This is a point that Africa Infrastructure Investment Managers, a private equity fund based here in South Africa, also agreed quite strongly with. Second point around coordination. It's key, we said, for private and public sectors to work together. Corporates should shift away from unilateral lobbying and make more room for multilateral lobbying across industries and sectors to accomplish transformative change in the enabling environment. This requires, of course, more coordination amongst private sector players, which calls on the question whether private sector companies should be considering a CCO position, a Chief Coordination Officer role. Third message around awareness. Scaling up our efforts to create awareness in the population about the importance of sustainability is key. Need is the mother of all invention, one panelist said. But without, of course, sufficient demand for sustainability, there can be no innovative change in the way we do business. This is something that AkzoNobel talked quite a bit about. This is a company that focuses on producing a number of goods and services to improve the way that we do business. But of course, for those innovations to take on, sufficient demand needs to be created in the market. Fourth, around local context. We must maintain a focus on our own geographic and social-demographic context. Standards should be descriptive, but not prescriptive, so as to ensure we don't stifle good business in Africa. This is something that resonated quite strongly with the Green Building Council of South Africa, which has conducted certification programs all throughout South Africa in terms of building requirements to ensure that they are more environmentally friendly. Here in Sandton, for instance, where we're all sitting, this is the most, they say, the most expensive square mile in Africa. It is also the most, the square mile that has the most buildings with Green Council certification, which also makes it the most resilient to climate change at this point in time. Lastly, around youth empowerment. And this is something that was brought upon by the African Youth Commission. We had a very, very inspiring message brought upon by the African Youth Commission. SDG 9 is foundational for many other sustainable development goals, in particular poverty reduction. But we want to ensure that industry, infrastructure, and innovation are tangible, but we must ensure that they are tangible for Africa's largest percentage of the population, which is its youth. For our youth to be empowered, for our SMEs to thrive in the global village and to take advantage of the growing shared economy, hence Uber, Airbnb, we need to foster internet connectivity everywhere. It is a cost-efficient manner to achieve a level playing field.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I loved your idea of a CCO and scripted but not prescripted. Very nice. Thank you. Very good. And now, Ayo, SDG 10.
Thank you. Thank you very much. SDG 10 is about reduction in inequality and exclusion. And again, you have to, we bear in mind that that particular goal is also the overarching objective of the 2030 agenda. And the discussion was quite lively and quite interesting. About 7 key messages emerged from the discussion. And the first one is that inequality is high in Africa. Drivers of inequality are multidimensional and complex. So they varies from small modern economy to large spectrum of informal sector, limited access or concentration of assets, physical and human assets like land, like expertise in specific areas of a country, as opposed to the larger part of the society. And at the same time, the ability of government to distribute national assets effectively, for instance, between rural and urban areas and among groups and among regions. They are very, very critical in driving inequality in most countries. 2, it is also observed that high inequality is detrimental to growth and human development, and it undermines social and political stability. 3, like I said earlier on, Goal 10 is not only a goal in itself, but it's an accelerator and a multiplier, that the ability to achieve it has substantial impact on the rest of the SDGs. 4, the stewardship of government is very critical in reducing inequality. Now, the government needs to really, really deepen its ability to use public resources more efficiently and effectively, more transparently and more accountably. So that we consider to be an important message. The 4th message relates to the centrality of partnership. Partnership is considered to be very, very important. Partnership around access to quality health and education, access to skills and entrepreneurial development, access to finance, land, and other factors of production are very important to moving forward. The partnership around those things are very critical. And again, the beauty of it is that the panelists were able to bring out good practices around partnership. For instance, when it comes to partnership with the private sector, Oxfam was able to give us how they were able to really develop beneficial ownership with Unilevers. And again, UNDP was able to tell us how they were able to promote gender equality in among private enterprises. Also, Airbnb, as well as Muladi, were able to tell us how they are able to use technology to really accelerate progress at the community level. And partnership with communities was considered to be very, very important. 3, partnership with government is also key. UN system in Uganda was able to tell us how they were able to integrate about 1.3 million refugees into the host economies in Uganda, which we think to be very, very important. Then the sixth message is that policy reorientation towards marginalized group and how to reach communities and groups are very important in reaching equity. And in this regard, there is need for us to focus more attention on children, on girls, women, and youth, because they are considered to be an important vulnerable segment of the society. Again, there is no specific silver bullet. That's the main message we are taking home. There's no silver bullet in the sense that policies that help to accelerate reduction in poverty do not necessarily mean the same that will help reduce inequality. For instance, quality education and enhanced productivity can help to increase reduction in poverty. But if not accompanied with progressive tax system and efficient social protection system, it could lead to high level of inequality. And finally, this book was launched just about 7 days ago in Maputo. Trends, Determinants, and Consequences of Inequalities in Africa. And one of the main message from there is that we need policies that will help us nurture and accelerate reduction in inequality, nurturing three of equity in Africa. And I think it's one of the issues that, policy orientation that has addressed the multidimensional approach to inequality in Africa. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And again, that was the role of government driving policy to drive change, but the right policy for the right change. Thank you. And finally, Liz, on SDG 11, on sustainable cities.
Great. So although we value redundancy as a resilience principle, I'll try not to be redundant, as most of my colleagues here have already expressed many of the themes that we had in our group. So we had a group of disruptors, really, system disruptors from BMW, the representative spoke about their green cars and their car sharing initiative. HP, who spoke about reusing, recycling, and repurposing. Uber, and also car sharing, and Asconoble, who talked about leveraging unused spaces to enhance social cohesion. A really lively conversation, and really where the takeaways for us were that we really need a mind shift as towards approaching investments in urban resilience, and there really needs to be a shift towards more longer-term investments, which are able to address both the acute shocks and the chronic stresses that cities face. We certainly talked about African urbanism and the need for creating the space for this unique concept. African cities are most rapidly urbanizing, and as we approach the challenges of resilience building, we need to think about bespoke solutions that embrace the culture, the heritage, and also are responsive to this need for paradigm shift around shared transportation, et cetera. But also we need to think about informality as part and parcel of African urbanism, and think about ways to integrate informality in our development plans. Financial returns and profitability, we talked about all of the organizations that were represented were all for-profit organizations, but also just really thinking about embedding this notion of resilience building as a component of the ROI, and not as an additive and a nice to have. And we certainly talked about the additional need for investments that provide, for prioritizing investments that provide a resilience dividend, so the ability to provide multiple benefits across multiple stakeholders and sectors. And then partnership building, I think that was a constant theme for us, but we actually challenged the notion on partnership building, and we felt that there's a need for new and innovative types of partnerships, and it's not exclusive to the public and the private sector, but really thinking about the catalytic role that philanthropy and civil society can offer in creating these new and innovative approaches. And then the need for improved measurement and resilience. What does it mean to be resilient, and how do you monetize resilience? And so we talked about, similar to how the reinsurance sector has really been able to measure risk and monetize risk, applying that to resilience building. And overall, I think the key takeaway was that building resilient and sustainable cities is not a goal that is limited to urban practitioners, but really we need to all start approaching this through a more integrated, holistic, transversal approach, and we all need to think of ourselves as systems disruptors and really embrace this concept of being silo busters.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So a slightly different take there. Thank you. About disruption by big companies or small companies, disrupting to create resilience. Very interesting, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, panelists. A huge round of applause, thank you.